Our other big story tonight, impeachment. The Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives met all today, hearing the evidence and the arguments for and against putting President Trump on trial. Nick Schifrin begins our coverage.
Today, Democrats summed up their case for impeachment and sharpened their attacks on President Trump.
President Trump's persistent and continuing effort to coerce a foreign country to help him cheat to win an election is a clear and present danger to our free and fair elections and to our national security.
Republicans called the hearing a sham.
Lawyer is badgering the witness. We have to have some decorum in here.
And called the Democrats' case an unfair rush to judgment based on secondhand information.
The impeachment inquiry record is riddled with hearsay, presumptions, and speculation. To paraphrase Professor Turley from last week, the impeachment record is heavy on presumptions and empty on proof.
This was Democrats' main attempt to narrate their story before submitting articles of impeachment. Democrats argue President Trump withheld military aid and a White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, so Zelensky would announce investigations into Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and the 2016 election. The first article of impeachment is expected to accuse President Trump of abuse of power, as argued by Judiciary Committee Democratic counsel Barry Burke.
He put his political re-election interests over the nation's national security and the integrity of its elections. He did it intentionally. He did it corruptly. He abused his powers in ways that the founders feared the most.
Democrats are also expected to accuse President Trump of obstruction, as described by Intelligence Committee Democratic counsel Daniel Goldman.
President Trump launched an unprecedented campaign of obstruction of Congress, ordering executive branch agencies and government officials to defy subpoenas for documents and testimony.
Republicans argued the Democrats had failed to prove their case. Republican counsel Stephen Castor.
The inquiry has returned no direct evidence that President Trump withheld a meeting or security assistance in order to pressure President Zelensky to investigate former VP Biden.
Republicans also pointed out that despite the delay, Ukraine received the military aid it wanted, and Zelensky repeatedly said he didn't feel pressure, including on his July 25th phone call with President Trump.
I've never felt any influence on me, and there are a lot of people in Russia, in the West, and in Ukraine who would like to influence me.
President Zelensky never vocalized any discomfort or pressure on the call. Contrary to Democrat allegations, President Trump was not asking for a favor that would help his reelection. He was asking for assistance in helping our country move forward from the divisiveness of the Russia collusion investigation.
The Judiciary Committee is full of some of the most vocal and partisan-leaning members of the House.
You're not being honest.
For the next 4 hours, you're going to try to overturn the result of an election with unelected people giving testimony?
Gentlemen will suspend. If the president puts himself before the country, he violates the president's most basic responsibility. He breaks his oath to the American people.
Forget all that.
And both sides took aim at each other's counsels. Republican Jim Jordan criticized the House Intelligence Democrats' final report for including phone call records.
Mr. Goldman, did the Democrats publish phone records of the president's attorney?
Mr. Giuliani, yes.
Did the Democrats publish phone records of a member of the press?
Yes, who was also involved in this.
Did the Democrats publish phone records of a member of Congress? They published the phone records of the president's personal lawyer, the phone records of a member of the press, and the phone records of the chairman of the Intelligence Committee's political opponent, Representative Nunes. That's what these guys did.
Mr. Chairman.
And after Barry Burke testified, he became the Democratic questioner.
In fact, you made a big point, sir, in your presentation, that on that call, President Trump did not go further and tell President Zelensky that he wanted the investigation announced to help his 2020 election.
He definitely did not talk about 2020.
Yeah. And Mr. Goldman, would you agree that if President Trump was acting corruptly, wrongfully, abusing his power, that it was unlikely he was going to confess to President Zelensky that he was asking for the investigation explicitly to help his 2020 election prospects?
You almost never have a defendant or someone who's engaging in misconduct who would ever explicitly say, in this case, President Zelensky, I'm going to bribe you now, or I'm going to ask for a bribe, or I am now going to extort you. That's not the way these things work.
Not present today, President Trump's lawyers. On Friday, White House counsel Pat Cipollone released a letter refusing to appear that warned adopting articles of impeachment would be a reckless abuse of power by House Democrats and would constitute the most unjust, highly partisan, and unconstitutional attempt at impeachment in our nation's history. The Republicans call Democrats obsessed. The Democrats call the evidence overwhelming. And split along party lines, the committee is on the verge of passing articles of impeachment for the fourth time in history. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
Our team is reporting from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Lisa Desjardins joins us from Capitol Hill, where she spent most of today inside that hearing room. And Yamiche Alcindor is at the White House. Hello to both of you. Lisa, to you first. What was it that would you say each side was trying to do today? And as you talk to members, did they tell you they think they're changing minds?
Well, Democrats, I think, as Nick reported well, were trying to lay out a substantive case that the president abused his power and was corrupt. Republicans did two things. They actually did answer that substance to some degree, more than we've seen in hearings before. But Judy, they also were trying to point at what they saw was other wrongdoing, other subjects, not just the president, but the call log, for example, or Hunter Biden. And they repeatedly raised points of order, sort of tried to shake up the hearing, make the hearing itself look like it was not on stable ground. As for whether they changed minds, Judy, I'll tell you this. This was the smallest crowd of any impeachment hearing I've seen so far. I asked one Democratic member what they thought of that. They said, we just don't know. We're hoping that we reach voters, but obviously there weren't as many voters in the room today.
And to you, Lisa, we, as we just heard Nick report, the White House decided not to put its side of the story forward. They didn't provide a lawyer, anybody to make a defense for the president. How are they reacting to today? And how do they think how do the Republicans feel they made their case?
Well, the president at the White House spoke about the impeachment hearing. He said he watched a bit of this, but he said it was basically a disgrace and a hoax. That said, Republicans really outlined a new defense of the president today. They went after Ambassador Gordon Sondland, the EU ambassador, the European Union ambassador. They said that he was seen as an intelligence risk, that he was seen as problematic, and that people were wondering why he was so involved in Ukraine. Now, Democrats and critics of the president will say that Ambassador Gordon Sondland was acting at the direction of President Trump. I spoke to the attorney for Gordon Sondland, who said he didn't want to comment about Republicans going after Gordon Sondland specifically, but he said his testimony speaks for himself. And in his testimony, Gordon Sondland said that he thought the president was asking him to go forward with a quid pro quo and to pressure Ukraine to get an investigation into Joe Biden in exchange for that military aid. Also, Republicans were going after Rudy Giuliani and trying to scapegoat him in some ways. They were saying that there was evidence that the president's personal attorney was acting not in line with what the president wanted him to do. But over the weekend, President Trump said that he was aware of Rudy Giuliani being in Ukraine and that he was collecting information that might help him. The president also said that Rudy Giuliani might be coming out with some sort of report that might be filed to Congress or the Attorney General. So even as Republicans are trying to in some ways throw people under the bus or scapegoat them, as Democrats would say, both Republicans are really coming up short on that end.
Lisa, back to you. Where did things go from here after today's long hearing?
Buckle up, Judy. It's going to move very quickly. Chairman Nadler said over the weekend that he does think they could have articles of impeachment ready for the committee to discuss this week. So that means probably in the next 3 days, maybe 4 days. They have not decided, our reporting is, exactly what those articles will be yet. We know that they will likely include abuse of power and some form of obstruction. Now, what's interesting here, Judy, just in the past few minutes, Democrats, Jerry Nadler put out a letter rejecting witness requests from Republicans. Now, this means it's not clear if there will be any more hearings or any more witnesses in the House process. The next hour may be the final substantive hearing that we have before Democrats move to marking up articles of impeachment. We don't know yet, but we're going to pay very close attention because I do think it will move fast.
And finally, back to you, Yamiche. We know the White House wasn't participating in what's going on in the House. Assuming the House passes impeachment, it goes to the Senate for a trial. The White House is going to have to participate in that. How are they preparing?
The White House is taking a very different stance as it relates to the Senate than they did with the House of Representatives. The White House is gearing up to have representatives come to the Senate and defend the president. I talked to a White House aide today who said he was 100% certain that there would be White House lawyers at that Senate trial. So the White House has been really beefing up its staff. The other thing to note is that tomorrow there's going to be some news here at the White House. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is going to be meeting with President Trump. And that's notable because the last time the Russian Foreign Minister was here was in 2017, and President Trump was accused of disclosing classified information relating to an ISIS informant to Russia. So people are going to be watching really closely how President Trump interacts with this Russian official yesterday, because Democrats have been making the case that really all roads lead back to Russia, including with this Ukraine investigation.
Yamiche Alcindor, Lisa Desjardins, both of you all day long on this story. Thank you very much.